Your Excellency, Mr. Secretary-General, Mrs. Ban, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all on this very joyful day for our university. It doesn't happen every day that we have one of the world's foremost and inspiring leaders in our midst. I thank you, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, for your willingness to visit our university. Today, indeed, is a very special day for us. The main reason, of course, being your visit, but there are other reasons as well. For instance, exactly 75 years ago, on the 28th of May 1940, Belgium surrendered after the 18 days campaign. 5 years of war lay ahead of us, 5 years of deadly violence and brutal deportation, but also years of sublimated cowardice and disgraceful opportunism. Second aspect, on the 28th of May 1961, The Observer published an article entitled The Forgotten Prisoners, written by Peter Binnenson. He wanted respect for Articles 18, 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for the freedom of thought and speech. As a result, Amnesty International was founded a few weeks later. The reality of war and barbarism, the sometimes impossible dream of peace and human rights, we face it every day, including the 28th of May, as it happens. To travel from hell to heaven, we need people who can overcome what divides us, people who give human contact, talking, and peace another chance, maybe even friendship. Let's not rule that out. But even without friendship, peace should be possible. The United Nations play a pivotal role in all of that. Mr. Ban Ki-moon, on behalf of the KU Leuven community, I thank you for being here with us. We are very honored and we hope that you have a pleasant stay in Leuven, short though it may be. But we know that people who have visited Leuven always tend to come back. You'll see, and always welcome, by the way. It's not the first time that our university awards a honorary doctorate to the highest authority of the United Nations. In 1952, Trygve Lie, the then Secretary-General, received our highest distinction in the final year of his mandate. At that time, Mr. Secretary-General, you were 8 years old. You were a schoolboy on the Korean Peninsula, which was then facing one of the most savage wars of this century, with consequences that are still felt today. Your family was forced to flee to the mountains. Despite the harsh circumstances, you did what is expected from a schoolboy. You studied. A couple of years later, in 1956, your English had become so good that your classmates selected you to write a letter to Dag Hammarskjöld, then Secretary-General of the UN. You expressed your concern about the fate of the Hungarian people during the uprising of 1956. I don't know for sure whether your letter changed the course of history, but that is not always the point. Beautiful letters can become history themselves, or just remain beautiful. Allow me to mention another event, still from your youth. In 1962, when you were 18 years old, sorry for revealing your age so openly, but when you were 18 years old, you spent some time in the US in the context of a Red Cross program. During that trip, you got to meet President John F. Kennedy. His magnetic personality had an undeniable influence on your political future, as you would confirm later on. You choose to follow the diplomatic track. After your stay in the US, You went to college, and in 1970 you earned a bachelor's degree in international relations from Seoul National University. Next, you gained the highest score in the diplomatic service exam and immediately embarked on a long career in South Korean and international politics. In 1974, you came into contact with the United Nations for the first time. Back then, South Korea had not yet become a full member of the UN. Instead, it had the status of observer state. You were appointed first secretary of your country's delegation. You had several assignments in the South Korean embassy in America, including that of vice ambassador, and in between, you still found the time to obtain a master's degree in public administration from, again, the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University in 1985. I will not sum up all the stages of your career. Probably you are aware of that yourself to some extent. I limit myself to the most important one, when the Security Council nominated you as Secretary General on the 9th of October 2006. The 192 members of the General Assembly confirmed your appointment on the 30th of October, and you have been in office since the 1st of January 2007 as 8th Secretary General of the United Nations and successor to Kofi Annan. You became the second UN Secretary General of Asian descent after U Thant from Burma or Myanmar, who received an honorary doctorate from our university in '68. We also awarded one to Kurt Waldheim in 1975, by the way. A great university does not conceal the less than glorious moments in its history. Yours is a very complex office. This has, of course, everything to do with the complexity of international politics. Your mentor in Harvard, Professor Joseph Nye, compared it to a new version of chess that is played on 3 mutually interfering boards at the same time, with new pieces and new rules. The top chessboard, level 1, is the realm of traditional international politics, which is mostly based on military power. There is only one king on this board, the United States. Well, Mr. Nye, by accident, was also American himself, but that's only a detail. The middle board is where the multipolar chess game of international economics is played. The board is the realm of many thousands of kings, of course, great and small. Military supremacy is no longer the only relevant factor there. And then, third level, on the bottom chessboard, the sometimes shady rules of intangible forces apply. The rules of the large money transfers and the multinationals, but also those of contemporary crime in the form of cybercrime and terrorism. It is not quite clear who is king here, if there even is a king, if there even is a chessboard. An extremely complex game, but also one that is beautiful, at least for those who can handle ambiguity. For the rules are vague, the winner is not always clear, and pure logic does not get you very far. The game illustrates the imperfect beauty of the acceptable solution, which is not always the intrinsically superior one, nor the most fair, but a solution nonetheless. You started your assignment in 2007 with a series of drastic reforms within the United Nations organization. They were not always well received, as they had an impact on vested interests and power divisions. Nevertheless, you undertook radical attempts to, for instance, increase the focus on talent and merit. You have made a clear effort to implement a more gender-neutral appointment policy, and you have tried to bring about a more optimal division of power between the various sections of the United Nations. Some reforms were probably more successful than others, but the fact remains that a number of important complaints about the UN are no longer heard, a great example of both modernization and continuity. more importantly perhaps, an organization such as the UN needs trust. When you took office, you announced that you considered yourself first and foremost a harmonizer and a bridge builder, and that you wanted to heal the rift between rich and poor nations. I quote, "You could say that I'm a man on a mission, and my mission could be dubbed Operation Restore Trust. Trust in the organization and trust between the member states and the Secretariat." End of quote. Indeed, when you took office, the United Nations were probably not at their best. There was the aftermath of the Oil for Food program with Iraq, which had not gone as smoothly as expected. There were a number of problems within the UN organization itself, and there were, as always, the new and ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, in Africa, anywhere. In the midst of all of that, you had your first day at the office in the probably most impossible job on earth. Your first trip as Secretary General took you to East Africa, where the Darfur conflict in Sudan was in full swing, with hundreds of thousands of victims, with more than 1 million refugees. As a result of your efforts, among other factors, a UN peace mission became possible. During your time of office, you have also devoted a lot of attention to the issues of climate change and global warming. You consider the great danger of climate change on a par with the nuclear threat during the Cold War. The most important tool of the UN and of world peace is not politics, and definitely not weapons. It is human knowledge, guided by wisdom. And that is where the aspirations of the UN meet the potential of a university. Our university puts great stock in actively participating in the social and cultural debate. We share our knowledge for the future of mankind and society, with particular attention for those who are most vulnerable. The university is a true Tomorrowland. A little over a week, you phrased that message as follows in your home country during the World Education Forum. Education must do more than produce individuals who can read, write, and count. It must nurture global citizens who can rise to the challenges of the 21st century. End of quote. So we need clever, critical citizens who are not only properly educated, but also see themselves in relation to the bigger picture, who love, of course, success, but at the same time know its limits. In a world full of dangerous conflicts and potential hotbeds, it is the responsibility of the UN to appeal to the conscience of the world, or sometimes, unfortunately, to create one where it's still lacking. Those who, like the population of our country, have had the luxury of living without violent conflicts for 70 years already, risk forgetting that peace cannot be taken for granted. We live in a country, here in Belgium, where we distrust ideology for ideology's sake, where we know and understand religion less and less. That is why we risk overlooking the religious and ideological elements in the most explosive conflicts. We live in a country where prosperity has become self-evident, social protection and free access to basic facilities a given. As a result, we no longer notice that the lack of prosperity is the main factor underlying most conflicts. The final element is something that you too, Mr. Secretary General, have repeated time and time again. For instance, you have pointed out that the root of the problem in Darfur was not so much ethnic as it was related to issues of drought and the availability of drinking water. Mr. Ban Ki-moon, today, my most important job is to welcome the Secretary General of the United Nations. But your most important job, apart from receiving an honorary doctorate, is to be the UN Secretary General. Your job will confront you with bloodshed, or maybe a natural disaster, or perhaps evidence of large-scale corruption and violent deceit. To cope with those situations, you don't need me to wish you political talent. You already have that talent. Nor do I wish you proper technical support, because you already have that too. Most of all, I wish you wisdom, friendship, and warmth. I wish you many people who, when they meet you, simply say, Buonasera, just like Pope Francis did when he took office and won the hearts of millions. Simple human contact in straightforward human language, the noble art of conversation, the word that does not feign, replace, or conceal action, but instead sows its seeds. Mr. Secretary-General, may I now ask you to come and stand next to me for the very brief official part. Komt er nu aflezen, het diploma, hè? Okay. Mr. Ban Ki-moon, KU Leuven is honoring you for your mondial political role, both as Secretary-General of the United Nations and as diplomatic mediator between conflicting parties, and for your contribution to the development of a global conscience, for your dedication to the protection of those who are vulnerable, the refugees, the children, the poor, and the ill, for your leadership during the darkest moments on our planet when our civilization was at risk because of the insanity we call violence and hatred, for your special attention to our global challenges, from pandemics and natural disasters to the supply of food, energy, and water, for inspiring our younger generation, for whom you are a living proof that civilization and solidarity are the only way to create a humane society that will endure. For these reasons, in my capacity as rector of KU Leuven and upon the recommendation of the Academic Council, I hereby bestow upon you the degree of Doctor Honoris Causa of this university. Congratulations. I give you already this. Yeah, and then the couple. So I hope it will be yours. It works? So there's quite something.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. So you can stay. Mr. Ban Ki-moon, I thank you for accepting this honorary doctorate, and I would like to invite you to share a couple of thoughts with us. So the floor is yours.
You can have your head, please. Mr. Ban Ki-moon. You can have your head.
Professor Rick Toffs, Rector of Louvain University, the Honorable Louis Tobac, Mayor of Louvain City, distinguished faculty members, dear students, members of the general public, ladies and gentlemen, bonjour, hello. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be with you today. Thank you for your hospitality. It's a great honor to be visiting Louvain. I'm especially privileged to receive an honorary degree from this renowned university. on university with the centuries of history that occupies an important place in the cultural and intellectual life of Belgium, Europe, and the world. I know that in addition to me, you are also recognizing the work of the United Nations around the world for our work for peace, development, and human rights. I accept this honor on behalf of many dedicated UN staff who bring the UN Charter to life. And I'm also honored to follow the footsteps of my distinguished Secretary General's predecessor, Trygve, the first Secretary General of the United Nations. I'm sure that my predecessors will be very happy in spirit that I'm receiving this honorary doctorate degree from this distinguished university. The United Nations Charter was adopted 70 years ago in San Francisco. Belgium's imprint on our work dates back to those beginnings. Paul-Henri Spaak, one of your country's leading statesmen, headed the Belgian delegations to the San Francisco Conference and the Preparatory Commission of the United Nations, and he then became the first president of the United Nations General Assembly. This is a very historic contribution Belgium has made to the birth of the United Nations, and we are deeply grateful. Belgians are deeply aware of why we have and need the United Nations. The Charter's preamble proclaims our main objective, I quote, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to humankind, end of quote. The first of those untold sorrows brought carnage to Flanders fields, not far from here, and too much of Belgium. I know that Leuven suffered grievously. The town was largely destroyed, and the university library lost hundreds of thousands of precious historical books. It is fitting that today the university attaches a special importance to the protection of cultural heritage. The threat to the irreplaceable ruins of Palmyra in Syria today shows the continuing relevance of their work. The second of those untold sorrows was in his dying days as the United Nations was being born. This year's 70th anniversary of the United Nations is a good moment to reflect on the past, but even more importantly, a time to have a conversation about what we can do to build a better future. That is what I would like to have with you today. Distinguished faculties, ladies and gentlemen, Belgium is not only a founding member of the United Nations, it is also a country with an active global presence today. Belgium works in the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission to promote peace in the Central African Republic. It is among the top 20 countries contributors to the United Nations regular and peacekeeping budgets. Belgium's official development aid helps promote African development, women's rights, and environmental protection in some of the world's most vulnerable countries. Belgian leaders have indicated a wish to contribute more personnel to our peacekeeping, political, and peacebuilding missions. We look forward to that deeper engagement. We need Belgium and all countries and all our partners in business, academia, and civil society to step up this year. We are calling this year, 2015, a year for global action, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to put our world and people on a more sustainable, peaceful, and equitable footing. In September in New York, the international community, together with the world's leaders, will adopt a new Sustainable Development Agenda, including a set of Sustainable Development Goals, which will be called SDGs instead of MDGs. The new agenda will build on the gains of the past 2 decades when hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of extreme poverty. We want to finish the job while going further to build effective institutions, stable societies, and lives of dignity for all. In December in Paris, countries must adopt a new and meaningful climate change agreement. Climate change is happening much, much faster than we may think. The consequences could affect the full range of human needs, health, food, water, and national security. At the same time, there are solutions. Many businesses and governments are already seeing the benefits of climate action. Paris can help us make a much-needed transition to low-carbon, resilient economies that provide prosperity while protecting the planet. Before both of these events, in July in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the global community hopes to agree on a framework of financing for development, sustainable development, to ensure we have the resources and technology to make our promise a reality. These are 3 global meetings, but one universal agenda. These 3 stops, Addis Ababa, New York, and Paris, give us last chance to avoid the worst impacts of climate change and our best chance to end poverty. We are the first generation that can put an end to poverty, and we are the last generation that can put an end to climate change. So we can address the climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, these opportunities coincide with a time of unease for human family. The world faces multiple crises. We are in the 5th year of a devastating conflict in Syria that continues to worsen. Humanitarian suffering in Yemen is affecting millions of people. These and other conflicts, along with poverty, persecution, other ills, have generated at least 50 million refugees and displaced persons, the largest ever number of refugees since the end of the Second World War. The United Nations is working hard to address these challenges. Our peacekeepers, humanitarian workers, and mediation experts are all engaged. A high-level panel is currently assessing the state of our peace operations in order to keep pace with changing threats. We are developing a comprehensive plan to prevent violent extremism. Last month, I convened the religious leaders from around the world at the United Nations to promote tolerance, reconciliation, and dialogue. We must take care to ensure that our responses do not make problems worse. It was quite encouraging, inspirational meeting with the religious leaders from around the world. We thought that in addressing this violent extremism and terrorism, I believe that there are clearly very important role to be played by religious leaders and educators, teachers, professors, and religious leaders. They should tell and teach their followers, their students, the correct meaning of mutual respect, how to live together harmoniously with reconciliations and peacefully, how we can make this society peaceful. I am counting on many professors and teachers starting from primary school to middle school, high school, and colleges. They should teach their pupils and students a correct meaning so that they can become a global citizens. Religious leaders, they all reaffirmed their commitment that they will do all their own role. The United Nations is also strengthening its efforts to prevent human rights violations. Through painful experience, we have learned many hard lessons. We know that violations of human rights are often warning signs of much worse to come. The Human Rights Upfront initiatives aims to strengthen early action and to address problems before they escalate into atrocities. The challenge of migration, which is happening here in the European continent and somewhere in Southeast Asia, have taken on due urgency with the tragic situations in the Mediterranean and Southeast Asia. Migrants are desperately trying to find a better life, but fall prey to smugglers and perilous journeys. I know we have all been saddened to see so many men, women, and children lose their lives in the Mediterranean. Our efforts are aimed at saving lives, but also resolving the conflicts and poverty that lead people to flee in the first place. This issue of migration has been one of the top issues which I have been discussing during the last 3 days during my visit to European Union and Belgium. Even this morning, I had a very serious talk with the Prime Minister Michel and also Commissioner of European Union. We are also working at a deeper level, trying to nurture new generations of global citizens. Last week, I participated in the World Education Forum, which was held in Korea with UNESCO. I know from my own life the overarching importance of education. I believe I'm one of the persons who got most benefit from good education, from a very poor boy living in a war-torn country, now standing before you as the Secretary-General of the United Nations. I believe that education has brought me here. I was poor, and we are all poor, but we were thirsty of knowledge and education. And when the country recovered and was ready for faster industrialization, about to take off, we had many skilled and educated workforces in Korea readily available, ready to step in and do the job. Today, around the world, too many millions of children are out of school, and too many others do not get education that matches the needs of today's economy. My Global Education First initiative is striving to promote access to education, quality, and global citizenship. In that spirit, I'd like to thank Leuven University for being a valued member of United Nations Academic Impact Initiative, which I launched, that aims to align the great power of education and knowledge with the objective of the United Nations. The United Nations is also working more closely with the young people. I appointed the first ever United Nations envoy on youth. His name is Ahmad Al-Hendawi of Jordan. He is just 30 years old. He says young people drive change, but are not in the driver's seat. I agree. I have been pressing governments to give them the driver's license that will enable them to participate in a bigger way. Together, we have made important gains in focusing attention on young. Yet we also see too many young people who are jobless, frustrated, and under attack. From the girls kidnapped by Boko Haram, Nigeria, to the students killed in Kenya and Pakistan by extremists, and those exploited on farms and in factories. Tomorrow, United Nations headquarters in New York, government representatives and young people will gather to mark the 20th anniversary of the World Program of Action for Youth. People often tell young people that are the leaders of tomorrow, but many are already actively working for peace and fighting injustice. We need to harness that power of the global good. Distinguished professors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and students, here at Leuven University, students are earning one of the great gifts a person can have, a good quality education. I know that is hard work, but I have another homework assignment for you. Become global citizens with a global vision. Act with passion and compassion. Challenge your leaders, your professors, your president, prime ministers, and CEOs. Tell them that you have a responsibility to make this world more peaceful and prosperous. Tell them you want to be at the table with them, negotiating table or work tables, taking part in the decisions affecting your lives. Use your voices to claim your rights. And I will work as your allies. Now, I'd like to say just a few words about what the rector has introduced about my first relationship with the United Nations. I was just an 8-year-old schoolboy at that time, 12 years, 1956, there was an uprising in Hungary. We didn't know where Hungary was at that time. It was in the middle of a Cold War. So Hungary belonged to communist camp, and we belonged to all this Western camp. There was a lot of demonstrations among Korean citizens, knowing that the people in Hungary was being oppressed and killed. Many students were oppressed. Without knowing much, of course, that we were advised to participate in demonstrations, students. And as representative of my school, I read out a statement, a letter to then Secretary-General Dag Hammarskjöld. I read out, dear Secretary-General of the United Nations, you must help the students and young people and people who are genuinely fighting for democracy, freedom. At that time, it was just 4 years after the end of the Korean War. So we were eagerly working for and striving for freedom and liberty and peace. I didn't know whether that message was delivered or not to the Secretary General. When I was elected and was making an acceptance speech in October 9th, October 13th, that was my acceptance speech to the General Assembly. I thought about that, and I asked the member state, during my time as a Secretary General, I sincerely hope that no such students will send me that kind of letters, asking me to intervene in some areas, in conflict areas, where students and people, their freedom and liberty and human rights are abused. Sadly, I'm receiving those calls, letters, many calls from young people and just the citizens. There are still many crises. Fires are burning. Many people are being killed. That is, while sad, that really motivates me and humbles me again and again. I'm working day and night to bring peace and stability. Ladies and gentlemen, this cannot be done by the United Nations alone. We need the full support. Every citizens in the world, their hands together. As I said, this is a very important year for the humanity. We have to shape a future development agenda which will put us all on a sustainable path where all the citizens of the world can live peacefully, harmoniously, while their human dignity will be respected. With this honorary degree, you give me another moral mission, and I accept this moral mandate and mission as a Secretary General. I know that you ask the United Nations to do much more, and I am committing myself to work for world peace, development, and human rights. And let us work together, ladies and gentlemen, to make this world a better for all. And I thank you for this honor. Thank you very much.
Mr. Secretary-General, thank you very much for sharing your ideas with us, your ideas on the importance of education, and indeed there are some people working in that field here in the room by mere coincidence. Also the importance of, well, the role of religious leaders, and even they are here. Also thanks a lot for sharing with us the courage and the pervasive mood of a young person in the 50s, yourself in those days. And it's nice to hear that and to learn about that. Because in a way, when we grow older, we always think that our wisdom increases. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's a form of resignation, a lack of courage, a lack of developing truly daring ideas. And we need that. Nothing is lost, never. And thank you very much for remembering that to us. Your honorary doctorate makes you a member of the KU Leuven community. That means that we share strong values to which I have already referred in my speech, and you referred to them as well. Those values have brought you to Leuven today, and those values, of course, have prompted us to confer a honorary doctorate upon you. I wish the United Nations a very happy 70th birthday, and its Secretary-General a very, very prosperous future. And may I invite you now to sign the Book of Honor of our university. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.